can enjoy the sound of my dishwasher in the background, but here we go. I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to flip the lessons around for today, because even though the dot points say to go through purposes of sanctions and then the sanctions themselves and their specific purposes, so general to specific, I think it makes more sense to talk about the sanctions themselves first. I've put the 2 teach lessons up for you so you can access those. Okay, let's go. All right, so starting with sanctions and their purposes, we've got an activate task here for you. I want you to write down the following sanctions from least to most severe. So pause the video now, get that done. And then I'll pull up the answers for you. So it should be dismissal, discharge with conviction, fine, CCO, court secured treatment order, and imprisonment from least to most severe. I guess also depending on the quantum of the fine, you can probably boost that up a little or down a little bit. This is what you all got down in your pre-work. Fines, their amount of money to be paid by the offender to the state. And they're calculated in penalty points, which shifts every financial year. The specific purposes of fines are to punish, okay, because nobody likes to part with their cash. They can be a specific deterrent to discourage an offender from reoffending, and a general deterrent. Nobody likes paying money for handing money over, so you're much less likely to speed, for instance, because you fear a fine, although whether that actually works effectively as a deterrent or not is kind of up for debate. Also denunciation, which is that purpose of sanctions whereby the court says, hey, we don't condone this behaviour. All right, up to a practice sack question, we've got discuss the extent to which fines achieve their purposes. Now we've got an extent to which here, so you need to stake your claim somewhere on the extentometer, and we've got the task term discuss and a 4 marker. So our plan for this has to be something where we get your statement of extent. So do you think that fines achieve their purposes to a limited extent, a moderate extent, a substantial or a significant extent, etc.? So, and remember with that signposting, just pull the words from the question and put it in. Then discuss means we need to talk about how they do achieve their specific purposes and how they don't. So we've got sort of 2 marks each to work with, but depending on where you stake your extent, you need to mould your answer on that. So if you do think that fines achieve their purposes to a substantial extent, you probably have 2 to 3 points in support and 1 counterpoint. Okay, pause this now and give yourself 6 minutes to get this done. Okay, so the answer guide here is that you have stated the extent to which fines achieve their purposes, and I've generously given that 1 mark, but you really want to be concentrating the bulk of your answer here. An accurate and detailed discussion of the extent to which fines achieve their purposes, including, I would say, 3 points of detail, because otherwise you're going to be a bit stretched for time, so I'm going to amend that. Discussion can include successfully act as a punishment. Again, it's people having to pay a sum of money to the state. It will only be true, however, and this could be a counterpoint, if the fine is a sufficient amount, and also if the fine, the person doesn't have huge capacity to pay that fine. Fines will not work as a deterrent for everyone. We know that there's big corporations who get fined, and they can completely absorb that amount. They can act as a specific deterrent, but of course we know many people reoffend and continue to do things like speeding. I've already mentioned that fact, the point that large corporations are unlikely to be deterred with having to pay what is a relatively small amount of money, but certainly it can act as an effective denunciation to say, hey, we don't condone this behaviour, and so a fine is attached to it. Okay, On to community corrections orders. You need to know what they are. Non-custodial supervised sentence served in the community. It is not the same as community service, although community service often attaches to a CCO. So it gives offenders the opportunity to undergo treatment, take part in educational, vocational, or personal development programs. They can only be imposed where an offender is guilty of an offence punishable by more than 5 penalty units, where the court has received what's called a pre-sentence report, and where the offender consents. The court has to be satisfied that this is appropriate so that this person can serve the sentence in the community. They can be handed out in the magistrates' court and in higher courts as well. But there are different time caps on it, as you can see here. So they cannot be a sanction for Category 1 offences. Those offences deemed as too serious for the offender to carry out their sentence in the community. And you can see a list of Category 1 and 2 offences there that are excluded. Category 2 offences sometimes can result in a CCO, but there are specific circumstances that will trigger that. Every CCO has core conditions and at least one special condition, and you can see those listed there. I'm not going to run through them. The specific purposes, though, punishment. People might say, you might hear in the media, people are on a CCO, they're getting off lightly. It's still a real restriction of your freedoms. So don't believe that. It's still a significant punishment. People who are serving a CCO have to often undergo drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. They have to report to their community corrections officer. It's still very limiting. Of course, however, we bring in the purpose of rehabilitation, which is much more, which is certainly met by community corrections orders much more than fines or imprisonment. And they, of course, can act as a specific and general deterrent. If we're thinking about whether CCOs achieve their purposes, think about the things in this box here, okay? Is there a better sanction? Does a CCO properly protect the community? Because if you're involved in a discussion about this, there are perhaps some questions about how well this meets the purpose of protection, because we know that the offender is serving their sentence in the community. All right, then we get to imprisonment. It is a custodial sentence. Please do not ever say jail time in an assessment. Imprisonment's a custodial sentence where the offender is detained in a correctional facility for a specified period of time. It is the most severe sanction. We categorise imprisonment levels from 1 to 9. 1 is the most serious, it's life imprisonment, and 9 is the least. Yes, you've already got this all down. There are a few different kinds of imprisonment sentences that can be handed down to offenders. So concurrent, running alongside each other, cumulative, stacking on top, and indefinite, which I don't think happens very often. But yes, obviously the court really needs to be satisfied that the offender cannot serve their sentence in the community for this to be awarded or given out. Purposes of imprisonment, we did this a lot last year. Punishment. Prison is not fun. It's pretty grim, okay? Protection also, because of course the person is kept in custody out of the community. Imprisonment can assist in providing for rehabilitation, but we really know that it doesn't meet this purpose very effectively because recidivism rates are incredibly high, and we know that prisons are these little ecosystems that unfortunately often aggravate the kinds of factors that may have led to the offending that's gotten someone imprisoned in the first place. Certainly denunciation, this is the court saying these offences are really serious, we won't tolerate this. General deterrence, although counter that with recidivism rates are almost at 50%, so don't know how, scrap that. general deterrence in that the community is like, hey, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to go to prison, but specific deterrence, big question mark over that, because we know that recidivism rates of reoffending are very high. All right, we can't turn and talk, but I just want you to read through this scenario here, and I just want you to respond in a full sentence response in your book, and then give yourself a rating for your understanding of the 3 types of sanctions that we've looked at, as well as their specific purposes. That's the end of this first part of the lesson, and now I'm going to reverse back and do the general purposes of sanctions. So back to the top here, I want you to describe 2 purposes of sanctions. Pause the video now, you've got 6 minutes to do this, and you're going to need to do 2 robust points per sanction. Here is the answer guide for you, following the IEE format. So you've got to identify 1 purpose of sanction. I've chosen deterrence, explain what this means, and then elaborate or give an example to reach the next mark, because you don't get one just for identifying in this case, because you've been asked to describe 2 purposes. Second part, another purpose of sanctions is rehabilitation. Explain what that means. It refers to sentencing that aims to break the cycle of criminal behaviour and reduce overall offending, and then provide an example there to get up to that, the final mark there. So 1 purpose, 2 purposes. All right. Sentencing in Victoria, and by sentencing we mean an offender has been involved in the criminal justice system, the criminal process. They've either pled guilty or they've been found guilty at trial. Then it goes to sentencing, and this is where there's no jury. It goes to the judge, who's the expert in sentencing. It comes from 2 main sources, mostly from Victorian legislation like the Crimes Act and the Summary Offences Act, but also from common law, which establishes a lot of different principles around sentencing. The purpose of sanctions, so that's sentencing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming lesson, but that's the background for you, because it's through sentencing, the sentencing process, that a judge or a judicial officer will give an offender a particular sanction, the consequence for their criminal offending. And the purposes of these are punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation, denouncement or denunciation, and protection. So judges won't simply look at 1 purpose of sanctions. They need to synthesize these to make sure that the sanction that's given meets a number of different purposes. And the body sort of in charge of sentencing in Victoria, the Sentencing Advisory Council, refers to this as instant synthesis. Okay, we can't do this as group work, but in your book, can you please draw out something that looks like this, a concept map? And I know that some of you are very particular about your note taking, but purposes of sanctions needs to go in the middle. And then of course we've got these 5 purposes around the outside. So I want punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation, denunciation, and protection. All right. And give a little bit of detail on each one so that you've got a pictorial representation there. Once you've done that, I've dropped this file, so purposes examples, in the classroom. And I want you to read through those examples and link them to the purposes that they achieve most strongly. So pause now and have a crack at this activity. All right. Okay, this case study as well, I will pop up in classroom for you, and you need to identify which purpose of sanction you believe is the most relevant and justify. So please do this task as well. And that takes us up to the end of the lesson, where I want you to thinking of PPR. Well, this says PPDDR. You can flip the letters around as you wish. But we tried to do this last year, and it's a really powerful way to remember these 5 purposes, general purposes of sanctions. I want you to come up with a mnemonic device. Remember, like purple panthers do dancing religiously. Yeah? Something like that will help you retain this. Otherwise, you're done for the day. Please make sure that you're up to date with your coursework booklet questions. You can do all of the ones that cover right up to the end of general purposes of sanctions, as well as the 3 types of sanctions that we've looked at and their specific purposes. Right on.